This is Human Behind the Music, a podcast from Composers for Beauty. Here, we listen to the real stories and the real voices straight from the people who bring music to life.
And, and here we are with Mr. Romberg himself. It's very good to have you, sir. Thank you for your time, for joining us today. For many of you out there, I'm sure you already are familiar with the name, and for all the others who are maybe not, well, stick with us for next, let's say, hour or whatever it takes, and then we will hopefully get to meet Martin a little bit better. So you obviously had a very recently a new release of music, and we'll touch on that as well. But I'm interested in what are you working on now? You're a very busy man, and the composer's life is always busy. So tell us about that.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me for this conversation. It's true that I just had this release, which is, as any proper project, it's a long and painful journey before the realization. Any birth that any woman can sign on this. There will be 9 months of, not so agreeable circumstances before the baby is born. So, babies are they take their time to grow, and they have their own logic about things. And this is the thing with any type of classical music. Actually, if you look at the classical music history, you often see an immense burst time of works. Sometimes things are made quickly, but more often than not, I think works actually need years and years before they become materialized in the real world, and even masterpieces as we know them today. So that's quite interesting. It's quite a relief to work in the classical music scene in that sense, because you are entitled to take your time. So
Yeah,
I think that we are civilization needs slowness right now, because everybody speaks about doing things faster and faster. So in this sense, I think that the classical culture and the classical European culture has something to contribute to the world. To accept slowness as a very substantial part of creative human life.
yeah, it's a very interesting metaphor you use, like having a bird in a way. So I guess almost any creative person, I would say, not just in classical music, but even in arts in general and things like that, would feel that kind of connection between the work and between himself and and the work. It's kind of very powerful, but would you say when we talk about that, does audience, the general audience, general public, kind of understands that connection as well as they should, or maybe there's something that we could improve on that? Because as soon as you said that, I was in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, I have 100% understanding of what you are talking about.
You mean in the sense that it's hard to understand how much work is behind something?
Yeah, also as well, but also how we are very kind of peculiar about it. We have this deep, strong connection to our work, and I think it's a double-edged sword, I would say, in a way, because sometimes we get too attached to the work that we create, and then we are not as open for feedback. For example, we can be blinded by our a love for our child in a way. So those things, from my own experience, could kind of block your growth in a way if you don't realize it at times and things like that. So it's kind of very important thing to discuss, I would say, for composers.
Oh, absolutely. A famous American film composer, and I can't remember his name right now. He said that don't fall in love with your music; it can always be better. That sounds a real little cynical, but it's actually true. Also,
Yeah, I agree.
um, It is your children, and but you obviously love your children, but you still should raise them a little bit, and let them live their own life more than
Exactly.
anything else. That's also very important. Let them go. Let them fly out in the world and become the thing that they are supposed to become or not. So that's why it's very important to publish stuff, release it, and as you know, that the world of how classical music is um, transmitted to the world has changed incredibly. The whole question about sheet music, do people read sheet music anymore and these kind of things, which they actually don't, less and less. So I think that recordings become more and more important for composers to, have your music materialized, get it out there. 99% of your audience will be people who listen to the music. It will not be people who actually play the music. And this is a big difference between our time and, for example, the Romantic era, where the clients were actually people who themselves played the music. If you think of the Salome pieces by Edvard Grieg, for example, which sold like mad. I mean, like these things sold in thousands and thousands of copies. So Peters earned a lot of money by selling Grieg's music to, all these bourgeois ladies who played the piano at their home and so on. It was an immense market, actually. Um, because people obviously had to play the music to listen to it. No recordings were available. So this has changed radically. And I think that, composers has to go with it. And at the same time, I think that, the whole sheet music tradition, which I'm very obsessed by, because
Yeah, I know that.
in my generation, I was lucky or unlucky enough to be, the last generation who actually wrote by hand. So when we started studying at the university in Vienna, this was in the end of the 90s. People still wrote with pencils, and then the notation programs came progressively year after year, and then 10 years after it took over. So that was actually interesting, because you had to learn, the hard way, writing by hand and writing how to do the layout, to do the graphics, to think about many things that are actually important for music to breathe, and to to turn pages, and all these kind of things that may seem banal, but they actually decide whether musicians want to play your music or not. If they can't turn the pages, they're going to just be annoyed, and they wouldn't like to play your music. So
I agree
it's very
100%.
important to think about it.
Actually, it is very important, not just how music sounds, but also how it looks. And that really does get kind of overlooked, especially by, I would say, younger composers who are maybe just starting out and things like that. Because now I would feel that it's kind of tough for younger generation of composers, for upcoming composers, because they have a wide choice, and there are many decisions to make, like which software do I want to use, and which way I'm gonna go about my music. Should I go in electronic direction and maybe do some hybrid stuff, or do it purely traditionally when where your music is performed live, or maybe having recorded music and then release that to the world, and things like that. There are many different decisions. Obviously, DAW softwares as well for recordings. People also play a lot of MIDI keyboards, and then that way they arrange music and things like that, especially in the film world. So there are many decisions to make for young composers. So it's kind of very hard, I guess, to know which way to go, which way is the best for you, and maybe that was a little bit easier for older generations. I would say so, in a way, because if you have no softwares, no anything, then you just write by hand, and then this is how your music is created, I guess. So, but it is actually a very important skill, I would say, because today obviously we outsource a lot of that to our softwares, and then I realized that only when I started to actually write it by hand, because obviously I was always using computers for creating scores, and then one day I just thought, well, it would be a good idea to sometimes just write notes. It's fun to write notes on the paper and then compose like that. And then I realized I cannot remember half of the stuff, how to write them down. And that was like shocking discovery for me. So that's something I guess younger composers might kind of think about. It's a good idea to think about it, to from time to time compose music by hand. I think it's a way different experience, would you say?
I think we have the same problem in all fields. It's like writers in the old days. They obviously write with a pencil, and then came the typewriter, which is a machine which is very tricky to deal with. When you do something wrong, you have to go back and use the white stuff and everything, and there's a lot of annoyance when you work with a typewriter, right? And then came the computer where you can undo things indefinitely. So we are going into this simulated reality more and more. And same thing with drawings. Like a young artist today will mostly opt for being competent within digital drawing,
Yeah.
even if you're skilled on classical paper. So there is a shift, like humanity shifts into this simulated reality, which Baudrillard brilliantly foresaw in the 60s with his simulation. I'm very fond of French thinkers. Obviously, I've
I
been in
can
France
see that.
for 20 years for a reason. It's not only because of the red wine and the nice architecture, although that is also a very important part.
I'm sure.
And the thing you said about choice, that's also quite interesting. When you see the development through history and the movement towards so-called freedom, what freedom of choice, right? You see that we have an exponential curve going from not having a choice for anything and to have an indefinite amount of choices. You can just take a supermarket as an example. Like you have literally 50 square meters on the wall of different chocolates that you're supposed to choose between. And the same thing, because you talked about technique, but the same things goes with style. I mean, like history has just collapsed. I mean, like today you can just do whatever you want, and you can
Yeah,
even write
anything
for rock
goes.
music and anything goes. And that was not the case 30 years ago. European music was much more narrow than it is today, and negatively narrow, I might add, but it was always narrow. I mean, look at the time of Mozart and Haydn. All composers essentially wrote the same music, and sometimes it's even very hard to hear the difference between the composers. I mean, they essentially sound just the same. We know about Mozart now because he took some liberties, of expanding traditional forms that everybody used and so on. The same thing goes for Haydn, but the framework was extremely narrow. There was not a choice for much. So this thing about choice is very interesting because actually, it doesn't make people happier and it doesn't make you a better artist in
I
reality.
agree.
So there's this very interesting research that I often think about and refer to, like refugees coming to Europe from Africa, from south of Sahara. One of their biggest sources of anxiety is actually to all of a sudden be confronted with an abundance of food. So like if you come from a village where essentially your nutrition is 3-4 type of vegetables and a couple of types of meat, and then that's pretty much it. And you go into a Western European supermarket, it is actually extremely scary, and a lot of people mentally break down because being in front of a choice that you can't relate to is extremely energy consuming for the brain. So that's why CEOs in big companies they often work with optimization of choice making, because to make a choice costs your brain enormous amount of energy. And today we have to take like 100 choices each day. We make more choices in a week than a person 100 years ago did in a year, which might also explain why a lot of people are strangely tired today. So this thing about choice, well, It's interesting. We are condemned to it, as Sartre said. I don't like Sartre, by the way, but I'm not sure it's good for us.
Yeah, but it also relates to composition beautifully, because composition also, the process of composing music involves a lot of choices as well. And I would you say the composition, music composition is actually very hard?
Yes, very hard,
Very hard, exactly. My
very
thoughts
hard.
exactly, and one of the big factors why it is as hard as it is actually making a lot of choices, and oftentimes as we kind of educate ourselves and improve our techniques in writing harmonies and counterpoints, orchestrations, textures, whatever the case may be, there are always so many choices to make, and then you need to make it all work together, and then one choice in one area will obviously affect other stuff you have on the score and things like that, and then obviously it will make your mind work so much more. So there is definitely some of that. Would you give us maybe your personal perspective on this? Did you have any struggles when you were growing as a composer? Of have you ever had any challenges? How did you overcome them? How to grow as a composer would be, I guess, a question.
Well, everything is a challenge essentially, and it should be. I get this question a lot. Isn't it difficult being a musician? Isn't it difficult being a composer? I said, yeah, sure, it's difficult. You think it should be easy? You think anything should be easy? No, it shouldn't. It should actually be hard, because um, it's like digging in the garden. It's like it's the earth is not without resistance. And if you just snip your fingers and the hole is there, you haven't worked your being to the goal of digging that hole. This is why I don't like Harry Potter. It's like you just wave your wand and the house is built. No, that's a very bad thing of bad way of seeing things. We shouldn't learn children to wave a wand and magically make a house appear. No, we should teach them to build it, and that's a long, painstaking, dangerous even enterprise.
Yeah,
And so
it
and,
takes a
and
lot
so
of effort.
composition.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, and composition is well, it's just like building small houses, isn't it? When it comes to choices, I have a little different perspective, because I have it quite. Although I'm sort of rational when I build things eventually, when it comes to how things should develop, how they form, I am more. I have a more feminine character, let's say. Um, Being more in a receptive mood, like it is like if the music already exists somewhere in the universe, and my job is to try to catch it. Like in spring when you try to catch the butterflies on the field. So the thing is that the butterflies already exist, and that my job is to make a nice trap so I can catch the most beautiful butterflies. And that's a very hard job. So what I mean with the hardness is much more to just to feel and sense the exact thing that should happen or has already happened, which sounds very esoteric, and it is very esoteric.
Yeah.
Um, and if you don't see any butterflies, then the hard work starts, because then you have to, oh God, where are them? Where are they? Where are the butterflies? And then you have to change your position. You listen again. You have to change your trap. You have to change the beats, and so on and so forth. And the weeks go by and there are no butterflies, and you get more and more stress. Like, where are the butterflies? So it's more like a very listening form of creation, I suppose. I'm sometimes I think I'm not even sure I create anything. I just feel like someone who tries to figure out things that already exist and try to transmit them in a way,
Completely
which
understand
is
that
enormously
feeling.
hard labor actually. It's kind of a different perspective.
Yeah, of course.
Um,
There's always that like um, intuitive versus more rational composer, I would say, and
well, you need
sometimes.
both. So when you have the butterflies, then you can start organizing them.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh, obviously.
So and here's the other choices. Will the clarinet play this, or let's put it in the second violin, and so on. So here we have the choices, of course. But when you already have the melody or whatever musical idea, whatever musical gesture, then these technical things start, which is another layer of suffering, which you also have to go through with real humans. So there's a third layer of all this. Is that so when you have your fantastic symphony composed and you're very happy with it, and it's a work of a genius, you have to try it out with real people and real musicians and real time and real humans with muscles that get tired and real humans with lungs that suddenly don't have any air. So and then again you have to filter your ideas possibly and to adapt it to reality. So this is the third layer of a composer's
Hell.
long path to success. Gosh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure many composers can relate to that level of complexity of the process of the composition, the music composition. But one thing you mentioned that's very interesting is like where are the butterflies? I'm sure you're speaking from personal experience, and I'm sure many of us experience the same thing. And sometimes it's called like writer's block. So you're trying to write, but there's nothing there. Uh, how did you deal with situations like this? Do you have any stories to share, or maybe any advice to share for us, for any younger composers as well? How to go about it? How Martin goes about it?
Well, strangely enough, I never ever had a writer's block, which
Very
that
nice.
sounds really boring, I suppose.
Yeah,
Um,
but also very impressive.
uh, I have other sorts of problems. So like my path um, has been a quite peculiar one because like when I studied in Vienna for 7 years, and well, during the studies, you try to adapt to the culture in which you live, and you try to sort of fit in to the modern festival kind of contemporary music uh, aesthetics, I suppose. And so, obviously, I also wrote quite abstract music. A
When you
little
say
bit.
abstract, what does that mean? Like
Well, that
abstract?
means non-tonal music. You
Oh,
can
okay,
compare it
obviously
to.
atonal music.
I was
Okay.
very into for example, Morton Feldman in that time, like very atonal, but very, very meditative.
Do you enjoy listening to that kind of music?
That happens, yes, with a very strict selection of works. Actually, atonal music has one sort of put, there's one small door where, for me, it actually works. It is when it is very, very calm and very, very meditative, and sort of takes you into the to the cosmical emptiness of something. When
I
it
can
gets
imagine that. I can
when it
imagine.
gets agitated and aggressive, this is where most people start to fall off, and me included. But anyway, the thing is, so after my studies, I was thinking, well, this is not really who I am, and I have to do something which is in accordance to my authentic character, not original character, because nobody is, well, very few people are original. Some people are actually, but I'm certainly not original. But I try to be authentic, which means just true, be true. And yeah, so well, my music is a tonal, romantic, sort of timeless um, type of composition. And when you start doing that as a young composer, you need to start figuring out, how will I realize this in the real world? Who's going to play this? What should I do? So a big part of the job was to to get things programmed, to get things played, to get things recorded, to raise money for the projects, and also to think about projects that would be a little bit off track and on the side of let's say the contemporary festival culture, but that could potentially be interesting enough to sell to, for example, festivals, artistic directions of festivals, and these kind of things. And this means that you also need to work on the concepts and to try to adapt things and make the story around the music itself so interesting that it could be a cell by itself for because you know that artistic directors and all these people around Europe, they're very worried all the time, very worried. They are worried that nobody's going to show up for the concert. They're very worried that they will be criticized for programming something that nobody has ever heard about, featuring a composer that nobody has ever heard about. They're very worried about these things. So we as composers, unfortunately, we need to help them a little bit and understand, from the industrial perspective in classical music, how the other side is thinking and how they are stressed about money and critics and all the parameters that are stressful for them. And I spend a lot of time with this, and the blockage is like, so go back to that. The blockage is more on that side. So, for example, if you have this, I don't know, symphony, just to take something, and you really would want it to be played by this orchestra this year in this context, and that doesn't work, well, then you sit there with the symphony and you don't know what to do with it, and that's a quite severe blockage, because then, like, why did I write a symphony if nobody's going to play the symphony, right? So that chapter, I think, is the most challenging. To write the symphony itself, that's fine, but to get it materialized,
That's very hard.
that's the hard thing. And however, it is most of the time possible. So I would encourage composers to look more for how they can not only create something, but try to understand how what they create can find a meaningful space in the world, being materialized, being played, being listened to, being appreciated. Um, and you just not go out of themselves. This is not only about you. It's about the audience, about the culture in which you live. Why should people listen to your music? You know it. If you believe you write beautiful music, well, that might be a value for people, and then you have to know how to make that understandable for a lot of worried people, because in the classical music world, a lot of people are very worried, and they need to be reassured, and composers actually should help them more than anything else.
So it's almost like taking almost a like marketing role in a way for your music, like building the story behind it and getting the best way to present it in a most effective way to other people as well. So these things that we are talking about now are not strictly music related, but you also need to develop a certain set of skills that are outside of strictly speaking music composition and music theory and ear training and things like that.
That's true, but the word marketing is too cynical, I think, because marketing is based on statistics and this kind of stuff. No. It's more about being very sincere humanly, and I think that composers from the 20th century withdrew. So there's a historical process where it comes from the Second Vienna School, actually, where Schoenberg and Oldenburg and Webern at some point they said, let's forget about the audience. But like, they don't understand this stuff anyway. Well, Webern had a hypothesis that humanity would develop over the decades to be able to sing his melodies, which he called melodies.
But it's kind of failed experiment.
Well, it was legitimate to have that.
Oh, I agree. I will agree
but
100%. But
it sort of failed. which is a shame for him, I suppose.
Yeah.
But as a group, these people took a decision they said no, the general public, let's forget about them. We will have concert behind closed doors. You know, for our small group, for our friends, for you, just a couple of people, and we don't worry about our proper culture anymore. We create our subculture. And from that point, composers got strangely introvert, and strangely just obsessed with the score and nothing else. But you know that in the Romantic era, for example, composers were like kind of swashbuckling public persons. When
Oh yeah,
Brahms,
just think about
when
Liszt. I mean, he was like the rock star of the era.
absolutely, but even composers, you know, when Brahms went on vacation, the journals wrote about it. Brahms is going on vacation. And they conducted their own music, they played their own music, they stand on stage, they participated in public debate. Um, the composer's role has been diminished in 100 years. So when we talk about, you yourself being present as a human being, talking to authorities, having understood your own ideas and being able to transmit your own ideas without being a seller, because you're not selling cars or iPhones. This is like a very personal project which could potentially have an importance for the civilization. Um, when you step up, you actually go into the role of composers as they were in the 19th century. So that can be done, I think, with a lot of calm and a lot of reassurance, because the composers that we consider great were actually good communicators, most of them. Some of them were over communicators, like Wagner, for example. When he started speaking about his ideas, he could go on for 8 hours without any break. And obviously we're not there. Um, but there is a tradition of being present in public space in your way, which is adapted for you, like less or more, which is natural, connected to the role of the composer. And I think that in this field, composers today can think outside the box and try to disconnect from this kind of autistic social environment that was defined by the second Viennese school. I think that that social climate and that social environment has been quite toxic for composers, and I don't think we should use that as an ideal at all. Furthermore, when you go out in the world and you speak about your ideas, your compositions might be colored by it. So um, they will not be independent by what you feel is the world, what you feel is society, what you feel people need. Do they need to be provoked? Do they need to have hope? When we work with beauty, which you use the beautiful word beauty in your composers for beauty concept, which this conversation takes part of. I suppose that this title is chosen because you have the impression that beauty is something that civilization need today, right?
Yeah, and it's in general very important for the humankind, I would say.
Yeah, and in there you have a lot of things to say. You can speak about Greece, you can speak about European aesthetics last 800 years. There's so much to say about that, which is and I think that the time of Schoenberg was the other way around. Possibly they needed provocation in that time, so that's why they developed like more provocative, aggressive, revolutionary characters and revolutionary types of music, probably because the times probably needed it. I'm not sure about that, but it's a hypothesis. And I think that a lot of people today recognize that our times we need something completely different. We need to reunite. We need to focus. We need to have hope. We need to be inspired. We need to get energy. We need to be able to look into the future and believe in that future. Um, and I think obviously music could have an immense role to play in that, because when people listen to a beautiful piece of music, they do get hope. They do get hope on part of humanity, and that task is unbelievably important. I mean, your job is very important.
I agree, and one of the things I would definitely like to highlight is that important human connection. That's actually kind of what it is all about, because if we do kind of follow this trend of artistic genius that is just like hidden somewhere in his basement or whatever, and writes music or produces some very complex works that nobody else understands, and things like that, that's reserved only for a selected few. That actually creates certain like alienation in a way, and it kind of brings us not closer together but farther apart, between the people, and between the musicians themselves, and between the creators and the general audience as well, because that connection is also kind of weak, I would say, in this day and age. We as composers, living composers, have this really important role, but we are not as connected to the general public as we should be, and I believe we really need to work on that as a collective group of composers, as a community. This is one of the things I believe we should kind of put as a priority, one of the priorities, I'm sure.
I agree.
Because what's the work of composer if it's not gonna be listened by people? Then if it's not about people, then what's the what's
Yes,
the
and
point?
and you have enormously to learn from just ordinary human beings.
Exactly,
You know,
exactly, exactly.
what you think was your work of genius, perhaps nobody likes it, and what you thought was just a banal thing that you did on Sunday morning might touch a million people to tears. You don't
Yeah,
know
almost
everything.
like Beethoven, who writes this simple like bagatelle in A minor, and then it becomes lost score and whatnot. And today is one of the most famous and most heard piano pieces. So almost
That's actually right. And I often speak about this example. A lot of people disagree with me, and that's fine as well. If we take the film composer John Williams, for example, I mean, he writes very good concert music as well,
yeah, of course.
as in addition to um, his film music. So, however, I believe still that his film music is better, because the frame you got you get when you do film score might be very healthy for you. You can't just go in any direction. And his concert music, sounds kind of like Alban Berg, and like early 20th century music, and it's very good music. Actually, it's fantastic music. Sometimes it's better than Alban Berg, but still, I think that the framework about forcing you to focus within a scope of um, not indefinite possibilities. I think that it actually makes most of us better. And he himself would disagree. I was like, no, look at my bassoon concert, look at my violin concert,
Of
and all
course.
that. But the general audience would say, no, no, no. I'm sorry. We still like the Star Wars suite.
Yeah,
So
of course.
as a composer, unfortunately, sometimes our egos get the better of us, and that is constantly corrected when you are confronted with people, and that could be educated people and not educated people. And I think that it's very important to be able to reach both of those groups.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
when you, for example, you play a Bach fugue, it's like just a normal person from the street would, pretty much appreciate that music. But a professional and a grand connoisseur would also, obviously, for obvious reasons, appreciate that music a lot. So, we need to, the music needs to be able to speak on several levels, to have several layers.
Beautiful said. Beautiful
Yes,
said. I love that. Yeah, and sometimes it's not even achievable if you set that as a clear goal. I think and then you start writing and worrying about these things, I think you will miss it. It should probably develop naturally. That would be my kind of intuitive thinking. So write it as best as you can and follow what you like, rather than trying to conform your choices to something outside, some different standard of the outer world. I would say rather just write music, write as best as you can, and make choices based on what you as a composer like, and what you're obviously inspired by, and things like that. What makes sense to you, and then let it live its own life. The work, let it live its own life, and then go to the next one.
That's very interesting. I always use myself as how to say, a laboratory rat for the music, which is speculative, because if you suppose that you are very different from ordinary people, then you will have a problem. If you suppose that you are kind of an ordinary guy, which I actually suppose I am, it might work,
As all of us, I would
or
guess.
not, or not. So it's like I'm just thinking very simply. If this works with me, it will probably work with other people, and that might be wrong. But I don't think it's wrong. The Greeks said that there are fundamentals within all humans that are similar. Like for example, common sense. So if you use common sense, you can talk to anyone on the planet, and they will sort of understand what you mean, because there's just common sense. Like don't kill your mother, or what, like no, like there are basic stuff that everybody can relate to, and we could speculate that music, if it works, also tap into that sort of common language. So if you use yourself as a laboratory rat or mouse, and it works on you, it must work on you. If it doesn't work on you, it's not going to work on anyone else. That's for sure.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
If it works on you, you might speculate that it works on others as well, and you don't know that. You have to test it. But the probability is that it might. And if it doesn't, then I think you shouldn't go back to yourself and look, why am I feeling something here that no one else feels? And then you can work on that. Don't work on the music. Work on that. Work on that state of separation from humanity, if that's a phenomenon. Although I don't think so, because I think that composers, they are ambitious and they worry a lot, and they write things that perhaps they're not related to themselves. It's very, very important to be in sync yourself with what you do. If you write something because you're worried that the violinist will find it boring to just play this boring line, or that the violinist will not be able to play these very fast things, and you worry about that the audience might think this is too short piece, or you worry about that oh, they commissioned you to write a piece that should last 15 minutes, and it only lasts 9.5, and you have to fill it out with 4 minutes, and you don't know what. No, like that's just intellectual, conceptual things. The project must be like 100% authentic and in resonance with yourself, and then you can have a look if it works on others or not. I think this focus is actually, this sounds very simple, but I think that actually it's rarer than you think, because I think people worry a lot.
I've certainly fallen to that. I can say for myself for sure that when I was writing, especially writing for orchestras and things like that, and I worry about this line. Is it like this is too boring? They are not. The viola's gonna hate this line. Let's try to make it more beautiful. It feels in a way like you're forcing something that shouldn't be there. That
Mm.
line works perfectly for the music, but then you look at it as, in isolation, and then you start to uh, change it,
Yes,
even if it doesn't need any change.
true. And here comes an interesting thing. When you materialize something, um, you will meet some resistance first, which is always the case. If you buy a house, no, if you build a house, if you um, get the work done and played and so on, there will be some resistance. And if you write a boring viola line in the first repetition or the first two repetitions, the violist will be bored. They will like do this. Who's this composer and what this kind of stuff? And they're right. Like your line is boring, but your job is to make them discover that they are a part of a whole that suddenly makes sense. This will be clear for them in the second or third repetition. It's not going to be clear for them when they sight read it the first time. Then actually they will manifest your worst fears. And this is where you are the visionary. The composers must have this visionary stand, like an architect. The architect stands with his drawings and look at the builders and like, oh, let's build the windows here and the doors there, and all the builders and the entrepreneurs and the owner will complain and like, why did you choose these windows? They are like, this doesn't make sense and all that. Just wait and see. Put the windows there, and you will see the facade. When those windows are put up there, you will discover what this is supposed to mean. But this means that you as a composer have to go through some sort of resistance layer, which is completely normal. So that's really important to keep your head cool when you write a boring viola line, because you will write a boring viola line because this is what your music needs, and you know why.
Exactly, I agree. It's also kind of it kind of ties back to that idea of facing challenges and everything. But I would say anything that actually worth in life actually requires a lot of effort and a lot of time. And that's kind of why it gets value in the first place, in a way. Because if it comes like the magic wand and everything is perfect and you just like write the most beautiful viola lines and everything, then it doesn't almost like has any meaning or anything. It's just like almost as a press of a button, boom, you have this piece and that's it.
Yeah, it becomes an artificial intelligence generated
Exactly.
image, which is perfect. And it's really strange, by the way. I mean, everyone recognize an image created by artificial intelligence instantly, although there are no technical parameters that could help you realize why this is not created by human, but everybody sees this instantly.
Yeah, I was
And the
thinking
only thing
about
is
that
that
many times.
it is too perfect. Perhaps
Yeah,
they will might manage to to program imperfection. I
for
suspect
sure,
that
for
they will.
sure. Yeah,
I
for
think
sure,
that,
for
that
sure.
will happen for sure.
I agree.
But the human is twistedness, awkwardness. It's not, we're symmetrical, but we're not 100% symmetrical, and we are also a little bit anti-natural in terms of the physical world. Like if you pour water from point A to B, the water will always pour in the physical fastest way from point A to B if there is a slope between 2 points. But the human might choose to take a different path. The humans might take the decision to go up and down and to left and right before it reaches the point B. And that voyage, that journey, is the actual work. That's
It's
why
never linear. It's never linear. Yeah,
it shouldn't be. And the pilgrimage, the concept of pilgrimage is to take almost the longest way between point A and B, to make the experience and the learning curve of the experience at its maximum level. So uh, it's like we have to make life difficult for ourselves, not to be computer generated, plastic surface, things that could be generated by machines, and that's bad news. So like, we have to make life a little bit difficult for ourselves.
yeah. but it is a big topic nowadays, the AI creation, and I know you're also kind of very interested in copyright as well, and things like that. But what is your take on AI generated music? We have now mm, witnessing an AI revolution right before our eyes, and it also impacts the music as well. And now you literally have softwares that are able to produce a piece of music on a basically click of a button. So you write some instructions, give me this and that, and then boom, and then you have a piece of music. And then obviously on the internet I saw a lot of how would you say, how would you describe it, like confusion and fear, and a lot of people, a lot of musicians were afraid for their careers and things like that. So how do you think about these topics?
Well, I really enjoy playing the devil's advocate with this thing, because I
Oh,
think,
you're one of the rare ones. I'm also on that camp. That's
yeah,
nice.
yeah, I know. I think this is all just fantastic, actually.
Me too,
You,
actually. Yeah.
you know, if your music sounds like it is AI generated in the first place, I think you probably have a problem. So when all these worried people, and especially film composers, television composers,
Yeah,
jingle
yeah.
composers, commercial composers, but even pop composers partly. Although I haven't really heard the AI pop song yet that convinces me. But um, I tell these people, yeah, you will lose your job. It's like the next Pepsi commercial will be made by the robot, and that's actually pretty good for you, because you should go home and perhaps do something else than Pepsi commercials. Perhaps you could think about being creative, like being authentic, being a philosopher, being a visionary. Be an artist. Even if you earned a lot of money with these things, those times are gone. And I think it's good for you. I don't think that. I'm not sure in what way a composer should actually do those things apart from earning money. That would be the only argument for doing the Pepsi commercial. Um, if money is important, and we need money, um, uh, you should probably do it a couple of times, but it's not good for your soul. And so AI is just a tool. It's just a big hammer and a saw, really, and it's a library tool. So it's not creative, so it's only gonna figure
It's
out.
not creative at all. Yeah.
No, it can't be. It's just it's like a library guardian who knows all the books in the shelf, and will do some synthesis between something that exists in the shelves. So it's difficult to be creative with that. I mean, it's fantastic for example, finding information and goodness. I mean, like
Deep research
a
and things like
library
that.
service.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I was asking about a quotation from Dante's Divina Commedia yesterday, because I needed to. It finds it in the trees. It's
Yeah, like
fantastic.
this.
It's fantastic.
It's amazing.
Uh, but that's all right. And so I think it's going to be push. It's a disruption phenomenon, which happened a lot in history because of technology. So there's another example of this. For example, in the beginning of the of the 20th century, I think it was 1920s, probably the between era, the world wars, where all cinemas had a small orchestra, silent films, so they had to have live musicians playing
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
film. And there were thousands of cinemas in the 20s. There were thousands of cinemas and 10,000s of musicians sitting in the cinemas playing live music to films. Technology happens, silent film becomes sound film. Well, in a couple of
No more
weeks,
jobs.
I think that between 20 and 30,000 musicians went unemployed in the 20s in America because of this. So, technology interrupts certain things, but that's all right. Things do not go on forever. Yeah, well, so these musicians, they go on the street and well, let's do something else. Let's form another orchestra. Let's play on the street. Let's teach music. Let's do something else. Let's become miners. So I don't know. Let's become carpenters. Let's become poets. Let's become presidents. You know, I don't know. Disruptions is kind of refreshing, I think. And
The
AI,
show must go on.
the show will go on.
Yeah, the show will go on. Yeah. So it is safe to say that you believe that composers should embrace these new technologies, AI and everything.
Absolutely.
That's very nice.
Not necessarily use it. I mean, if you start using it
of
and put
course.
your name in it, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
You
But,
can do that. But this is like it will eat your soul alive, and I don't know where it will end. It's about
nobody does. Yeah.
the faster AI goes, the slower we can allow ourselves to go. The faster it writes a symphony, the slower you might write a symphony. Humans should represent the organic aspect of this reality. The computers and the machine will always and exponentially be faster than us. But that's not an asset. Asset is actually slowness, and to build things and structures from the beginning. I mean, look at our universe. It's a very slow project. It's been around for billions of years, and it's not finished yet. It's not created in a second, and thankfully so. And humans should represent that creative slowness, which is sluggish and full of resistance and strange happenings and interactions. And I stop running after this hysterical rat race. That humans should become machines. Elon Musk is speaking about this, and I completely disagree. The project now is not to make AI slower; it's to make humans faster. So the new project of Musk would be to integrate chips in our brains that will allow us to think with double speed and this kind of stuff. And I'm completely against that. It will remove the real functions of humans within the creational context. And I'm not saying that religiously or metaphysically.
Of course, I
I
understand.
think it's just um, well, boring news. But you can have two thoughts at the same time. Like you can accept progress and regress at the same time. If you master the two timelines, like go forward, but also go back, then you expand. It's like that's the expansion in time and space that we should just embrace. Don't be caught in time or space. It's like a trap. The here and now is meaningless. You need to. I'm like going completely against the Buddhist. This is
Completely.
not very Eckhart Tolle, I suppose.
Yeah, but one thing
But
that
I'm for the timelessness. The timelessness means that you live in the past and the future simultaneously. And I think that's the interesting thing about being alive right now, actually. And by the way, if I may say so, there's a lot of political panic in Europe, going on, obviously, with everything which is happening in the world, and the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians, and they give all this money now to AI to be developed in Europe as well because they want to be a part of the competition. And I think that's wrong. I think that the quality of Europe is not at all to participate in a race that we can never win. Europeans can't win against the Americans or the Chinese and partly the Russians. Europeans, our contribution to mankind is conscientiousness, quality, slowness. Like Swiss clockworks. Like German machines from the 19th century. And they're absolutely fantastic metal machines. They've never been built better. It's about making quality things. It's about making quality clothes. It's about Portuguese shoemakers, they make shoes that you buy once for a little bit more money, but you will keep them for your whole life because they are quality shoes. The European identity is quality. It is not the rat race of doing things faster, cheaper, and being just in a monetary market. No, our identity is the other way around, and I think that we as composers might actually speak about that in the current context, because I think that's really really important right now to defend slowness and defend quality and defend conscientiousness and defend craft and defend the human handicraft. So that's another thing which is, musical. We might speak a little bit about the thing about the musical crafts as it exists. So I don't know about your education. Yes.
One thing we definitely kind of have as a vision, as a group, Composers for Beauty, the one value that we kind of want to push for and want to highlight to obviously other composers, but into general public as well, is like human created music, and all those ideas based around that. So that there is a tremendous value in appreciating human created music that's not created through AI assistance, or you can get inspired by AI. You can, I don't know, write a prompt to ChatGPT, give me some ideas about Shakespeare or something, or find me a quote that's interesting, or whatever the case may be. And then start using that as an inspiration and things like that. That's fine. But in terms of like writing your notes, your scores, and things like that, that requires obviously a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of skill, and you pour your emotion and your soul into that endeavor, and there is a tremendous value for everybody to find and appreciate in that kind of music. So that's something that we kind of want to stand behind. So human created music that is slow, that is imperfect, that will require a lot of time, not just to create, but a lot of time to listen to. As we all know, classical music compared to the pop music will obviously be at least double in length, or even triple in length on average, I would say. And there is also an effort from the listener's side of things, because he needs to he or she needs to sit down and really give her or his attention to that music, and then just through that journey, let's say you're listening to a four movement piece, let's say concerto or whatever the case may be, it requires your stillness, your concentration, and through that journey you also grow, and you also find a way to appreciate that music, because it also requires time. So getting back to the first point, obviously, I would say there is that same thing on both sides, as composers and as listeners to music, but also as musicians who perform the music. They need to practice that music, and obviously they were practicing their skills for decades, usually in classical world, and then they put that invest that knowledge and that thing to make that music alive. So there is so much to appreciate, and it's a completely different league and universe of its own, compared to a push of a button and then boom, you have something that's kind of beautiful but meaningless.
That's right. And I might add one parameter to that, and that's the hand. I'm just repeating that, the actual hand. So when I compose something, I mostly try to play through it myself. I mean, I'm a really bad violinist, I have to admit, and my violin cost 150 euros and has a big crack in it. But so I always try to
So composer.
squeak through my string lines myself, just to have a feel for it. Is the grip like is it really too big? Is the how is this um um and things get modified a little. Then suddenly, like you just so there's no break here. I mean, the musician hasn't had a break for 50 bars. That's really tiring to play. Well, let's try to find him a break. And the same thing like with key music, for example. Try to play it through. If it's unplayable by yourself, I'm not a great pianist either, but normal kind of mediocre pianist. If I can't play it through myself, then there is something wrong. I probably need to simplify it a little bit. So, but that's you don't know that before your hands start testing things out. So I think that the body and the same goes for lungs with reed instruments and brass instruments.
And singing as well.
Singing as well. I mean, everything essentially comes down to the song. If you don't play any instruments whatsoever, if you can't sing the things that you write, it's going to be hard to play.
Yeah, for
Because
sure.
a musician breathes, even if it doesn't breathe. I mean, a pianist breathes, and the music. If the music stops after like 20 seconds, I don't know, like a cycle of, then it's good. It's very good. So
let's talk for a bit because what I want to explore as well here is I want to touch about your latest release because it's obviously something that's very interesting, and I was listening to the music before in the preparation for our interview. I was like, okay, what's Martin? What is Martin has? What Martin has for us? What has he presented us with? And it's obviously a solo piano album. But what was the first thing that kind of popped for me that sticks out is the sheer range of inspiration that goes behind this music. Can you share a bit about your inspiration behind Arts and Science?
yes. So first thing to say is that obviously as a composer, when you do an album like this, it will probably be pieces from different time periods. So these are, well, a selection of the latest pieces from the last 10 years, I suppose. Although I've written others as well, but these ones were not recorded. So it's a compilation of things that have been composed during the last 10 years. Um, um, the common thing about everything that I write is that I always have some inspirational source. It can be a poem. I suppose I'm a program composer essentially. It can be a painting. It can be a scenery. It can be a character, which is the case with the Valaquenta collections. So the Valaquenta collection is the second collection in a rather lengthy series based on Tolkien's description of uh, the pantheon of his mythology, let's say. And 15 years ago, I composed, the male characters from this pantheon, so the 10 male deities, and then 10 years later, because the ladies are very scary to work with. I I needed another 10 years to dare start with the women for obvious reasons.
Completely understandable.
Yes. So when you're 25 or 30, then this is being scary. But 10 years later, it sort of works. So so that's a part of that type of narrative where you try to catch a character that is described literally. Although the Tolkien's characters in this particular context, in the Silmarillion context, is mythic, archetypical characters that can be related to the world myth as well. So when you dive into those type of deities, the star goddess, the goddess of sorrow, the goddess of hunt, these kind of things, then Obviously, you tap into the Greek mythology, Greek-Roman mythology. You tap into Nordic mythology, um, even Eastern European stuff that I think is more and more interesting. That I would like to explore more and more. I think that Eastern Europe is, oh, hail to you, um, is a very interesting cultural space and energy source for Europe in the future, for many reasons. But anyway, so the mythical archetypical characters are very universal, and although they have, I hope, the color of the Tolkien universe, they are also, universal in, um, let's say, emotional expression. Let's put it that way. And
Yeah.
I tried with those pieces to simplify myself. So the first Valaquenta collection is quite lengthy, very ambitious, quite technical pieces, so like 7, 8, 9 minute piano pieces. And with age, I try to be simpler and simpler. Like to write simple stuff is actually harder than being complicated. To be concise, to have a precise message that is just rightly expressed, not too long, not too short, not too emotional, not too cold, not too, to find this balance between the too much, the too sentimental, and the too little, the too intellectual. So I try to be simpler as I age, and I think all these pieces are probably expression of that. And so there are also 4 pieces inspired by the paintings of Nerdrum, Odd Nerdrum, the Norwegian painter,
Of course.
which I work as a director at his new museum in Norway, which is another fantastic project, very musical project also. And those pieces are slightly more complex for strange reasons, because when you should get to life a static image without the narrative, then the music must make the narrative and so on. So that's slightly more complicated, but that's another form. So you have the character descriptions and you have the painting, and the same thing for the 2 Gustav Klimt pieces. And at the end of the CD, there is a small folkloristic uh, um, variation of a melody I recorded from a very, uh, elderly, beautiful woman, which is the mother of a dear friend of mine and family member, who basically carries with her this oral tradition from the medieval era that miraculously exists still in some individuals. I mean, she could be from the 19th century. It's a miracle that she's alive. And I recorded this small melody. She's singing the stave, which is a medieval ballad form. And I made this sort of romantic fantasy out of that. So that was very touching.
Wow, that's amazing. That's
Yes,
amazing.
yes.
But for me, when I was listening through the music, one piece kind of really stuck out, and that's the now my French is not that good, so it's tableau kitsch. Is that how you say the
Yes,
name?
that's German. Well, that's French German actually. I like to mix all the languages I speak sometimes.
That's why
Uh,
it's difficult.
yeah. But we use the word kitchen like it's a German word, but it is used in all languages, so
Yeah, we
it
have
is.
it in Serbian as well, but the fourth movement, the fourth part of that composition, Stranded, if I recall correctly, is the
Mhm.
name. For whatever reason, it felt very, like, I guess, title appropriate for me in a way. And I was thinking while I was listening to that piece, uh, what was the thinking behind naming it like that? Because in a way, I'm very big on titles. I really do believe that titles can play a big role in how our music is perceived. So I was thinking maybe you had something similar in mind when you named that, because I can quite put my finger on it why it feels the way it feels to me, but it is, for me, I'm perceiving it a little bit kind of claustrophobic. It's almost like it's trying to kind of break out, but it never does, in a way. That's how I kind of felt about that music. It's a beautiful piece. And then I listened to it. Basically, I got hooked on the first listen. And then I was listening to it a couple of more times in the past couple of days, and the feeling is still there. The same perception that I had the first time is still there, and for me, that's obviously a great compliment to you and to your writing. And then my thinking is like, do you are you particular with your titles? Do you pay a lot of attention for your titles, or they just come and go, like with your inspiration? Oh, I feel this, I see this, I name it like that, and what's the thought process behind
Oh,
that?
well, absolutely. Well, none of those. Actually,
None.
the title of the pieces are related to the painting. So this painting
Oh,
is called Stranded. The painting is about it's fantastic, mm, sort of a minimalist Caravaggio style painting, which we have at the museum, by the way, of a female beautiful body with a small baby in her arms, and they are stranded on a beach.
I
And
don't even know that one. That
there is
one
a
maybe
light.
it's a famous painting, if I'm not.
It is a fantastic painting. It's one of
Yeah,
the
I think I
Nerdrum's
know that one.
masterpieces. It's very meditative and at the same time um, amazing in terms of light drama. So like the Nerdrum, he studied Caravaggio and Rembrandt when he was young, and Caravaggio is known for his construction of drama with the black and white and very few colors. So this shadow technique, as they call it, was a work with contrasts more than big palette. And in this painting, so Nordum kind of does something similar because there is this painting of the woman and the child, and there's only brown nuances like we find in Rembrandt's also. Uh, Behind in the horizon, there is a sun going up or down very subtly. But from another angle, there is light coming down on the baby's forehead. And this light comes from another source. Light comes from another perspective and a heavenly kind of a ray of light that has nothing to do with the sun or the moon or
Yeah, it's completely independent.
yes, independent, and that has a message. So this is a meditative painting, but with some sort of hidden storylines at the same time. It's about the hope for humanity, because what I think he says with the painting is that this baby is perhaps the last person on Earth. The last seed after the apocalypse, after the forest has burned down. There will always be, another tree that will grow. And going back to mythology, like all mythologies, Bible included, has apocalypse, as a part of the concept, the end of history, cyclically. And when history ends, it starts again with the new seed, with the new children that survives the apocalypse, and so on. We have this in the Norse mythology as well. So there are two children. They survive Ragnarok, as they call it,
Yeah.
the end of the world, Asken and Bla. And so there will always be, the children that will survive everything and go on. So yeah, so the titles and the paintings are sort of set. Um,
Does that
um,
go for all your work? This is how you get inspired by something, and then whatever the inspiration is, you will pull the title from that source.
mostly, mostly. Uh, on this album, for sure. So the paintings are those actual paintings by Gustav Klimt and Odd Nerdrum. And the character from Tolkien's universe are those actual characters. So it's very straightforward, actually.
Yeah,
Um, so
that's
most
very
of the
interesting.
time, my titles are not at all independent.
Oh yeah, okay. And what's the connection between Martin and Tolkien?
Well, several things. We have birthday on the same day. That's a starter. Tolkien.
So my question would go in a way like, are you a big fan of his work?
Yes, obviously, I'm a fan of his projects. So the project as such is to detach metaphysics and mythology from cultural identification. So like the Greeks have the Greek mythology, and the Nordic countries have the Nordic mythology, and people get like this has been sort of toxic as well. With sort of our Christian philosophy and their Jewish and their Islam, and so when metaphysics get connected to ethnical groups and nations and national traditions, things sort of get sideways. So when Tolkien and some of his other, well, many other people in his era actually, and also in America. Hello, are you there?
Yeah, of course, of
Yeah.
course.
Oh, yeah. They sort of suddenly discovered that we could detach mythological writing from a historical, national, ethnical, and certainly political context. And that's quite refreshing because to have let's say metaphysical or religious longings today, then it's very complicated, but because suddenly you make part of a group, you call yourself a Christian, suddenly you are part of the Christians, and they behave in this type of way, they think in this kind of way, and you're sort of trapped right away. What Tolkien did was he created something called co-creation. So consider humans in sort of a Catholic way, that humans are under creators of the big creator. So we have like we can create under universes in the bigger universe with a lot of liberty and freshness. And so when I was 16, I read the Lord of the Rings for the first time, and I remember the death scene, which it really is, when they say sail into the horizon in the west, which is actually a commentary to Celtic myth. There's a lot of Celtic mythology which is based on sailing into the unknown and let God guide you to whatever isles that you will be led towards. That was the first time I thought about afterlife, about something that is beyond our dimension, and so on. So you can say that this literature opened up a metaphysical space that, like traditional religious scriptures, to me, is not longer capable of doing. And this is where also creativity comes into play. So the creative human mind may open those doors into the other realm, or the other realms, plurally. And basically that has been a source of inspiration ever since, because I think it's a successful project in that sense, and it really makes people come together from all sides of the planet, and it's amazing how universal the language becomes when it is metaphysical and partly religious. Why not? Because there is a creation myth and there is a god. It's called Iluvatar. He never shows
Yeah, of
himself,
course, of
just
course.
like
He's the creator of everything. Yeah.
just like the Christian and the Jewish and the Islam God. He doesn't show himself by
And
principle.
also there's music there as well, because it comes from the singing of Ilufratar, and then the creation starts and things like that, which is obviously
That's right.
amazing.
That's right.
Yeah. One thing I would also like to ask you is, well, basically now when you have like this big inspiration, let's say in this case Tolkien or whatever, even the paintings and things like that, but then you're writing for a solo piano. Solo piano, maybe not just solo piano, solo instrument, any solo instrument, in my opinion, would be oftentimes much harder to write rather than writing for orchestra. you're much more limited in your choices and things like that. So how did you go about choosing your instrumentation when having such a rich inspiration and then confining it to a solo piano? I mean, obviously, solo piano is obviously a very rich instrument, and you have a lot of ways to showcase music, obviously the range and the colors and dynamics and everything. Did you ever thought maybe writing this for multiple instruments or even orchestra or larger ensemble, or why did you choose solo instrument?
Well, several things. But first of all, I actually have a new CD coming up. I hope quite soon. And we have recorded three orchestral pieces by me,
Very nice.
which we did in Germany last year in May. I'm still editing it and so on. But that's three orchestral Tolkien-inspired pieces. So there is that as
Okay.
well. Yeah. The piano, well, it's very practical. I'm a pianist, but there's something more to it. The piano, well, all solo instruments are pure, but the piano it's a pure sound because it's not, well, when it's alone, it's purified, and it has the complexity through the 10 fingers, to express uh, complex things over time and space. It is
Texture
it
and
is it is,
everything.
it is very difficult to write an album for solo violin only. It will get boring at some point, at least in this language. I can't think of any romantic musical language that would not be boring after a certain amount of time in any solo instruments, actually, apart from key instruments. It worked in the Baroque era because of other parameters, but I can say that a solo violin album would be achievable actually in this language.
So
I,
it's
I'm so,
mostly for
so
the practical reasons.
yeah, and then you have the practical reasons, and then you have circumstances which are lucky and then interesting in its own regard. So, for example, for this album, so my friend Alexandra Silocea in Vienna, the Romanian French pianist, fantastic. She is one of the featured Bösendorfer pianists, and she had access to the different Bösendorfer instruments, and she's working closely with this artistic series of Gustav Klimt pianos, which are actually quite small pianos for Bösendorfers. They're very expensive, by the way, as all new pianos are. But
Exactly.
But I was thinking, oh, well, the connection between artworks and the instruments is quite interesting. And the sound is much more narrow and not like an immense grand piano, but I'm not interested in that anyway. I'm interested in authentic things, in about, in intimate things. So this is intimate music and it needs an intimate piano. So we recorded with that actual piano, which makes the connections between the Gustav Klimt paintings and paintings as such and the pianos. You know that key instruments were always decorated up till the Romantic era. Like
Yeah.
they used the piano as a sort of a tableau. Artists painted on them, and the cembalo were always decorated, and there was like a landscape painting under the ceiling and so on. So that also draws lines back to some historical traditions, which are interesting to reflect upon. So you'll also have these kind of circumstances that makes the project quite special. So yeah, so several things, but the pure piano music is kind of a safe road to at least make one album that works over a certain amount of time, and yeah.
Are you happy with your release and your recordings after now everything is done, everything is published? Are you happy with your child?
I'm very satisfied with it being out there. Happiness is not a word that I often use about myself. I'm not sure if life can be very happy, even if people make statistics about it. I don't know what this means, but I think satisfaction is certainly a word. and satisfaction until the point where you know that you have done your job. This is the children that you have made, so let them go out and rather and live their life, and you have not control of it anymore. And after that, it's other people's decision if this should live or not live, and these kind of things. You don't have control over all that. So I'm not worried. That I don't think about should these pieces become popular or not popular, blah blah
Oh,
blah.
of course, of course, of
I,
course.
I don't. I'm very, very satisfied that a long journey, which all these journeys are very, very long, that long journeys come to an end. It constructs you as a composer when you actually takes things to their end. When you have recorded and published a piece, you can detach yourself from it. Before you have done that, it is always a process, and you will go back to it again and again and again, perhaps change it. It's like Edvard Grieg with his piano concerto, and he revised 4 times and his whole life, and that's good revisions, by the way. But it's like you're never finished with it, and you're never really satisfied, and there's always something bugs you, and there's always something wrong, and there's always something you can improve on. But at some point, it's good to let things go also. So that's the satisfaction and the relief of a thought, being mature enough, having gone through all this fermentation process. Just to travel out there and live its life. That's a great satisfaction. That's a word I would use. And we need those moments of relief to be able to go on. If you stockpile 100 compositions and they sort of stand in queue to be materialized, and it's like being pregnant with 100 babies, and
Yeah, it creates pressure.
no baby goes out. So you need to find a system where the babies are born like regular.
Yeah,
Sorry to
I
use
like
very
that
feminine.
analogy. I like that analogy a lot, especially the thing when you said that's the moment when you completely detach yourself. I think that's a very important moment for any composer to get to that point of the work when you are completely able to let it go. You kind of then even free some of your resources emotionally, spiritually, and even time-wise as well, to continue your work and continue your life and let the work live its own life. So I would just like to highlight that as something that I was thinking a lot through my composition career as well, especially when I was younger, when I was growing as a composer. That was the one of the challenges to come to eventually say this is the finished piece, like this is the end, move on, uh, go for the next one, and things like that. I think that's very important.
Yes.
And for the closing section, I would ask you maybe some light, fun questions. For example, very sort of popular questions. What would be your influences in terms of music? Not necessarily classical music. I'm sure you listen all kinds of music. Are there anything particularly interesting that you would like to share with us? What do you enjoy listening to?
I thought that you were asking me about my favorite color, but this
It is that kind of question, but we would like to know.
well, thinking about it
Not
now,
necessarily favorite, obviously, but there are
sure, sure.
obviously some
I think that
composers that you
yeah,
maybe
there are
enjoy.
some composers, obviously, which I mention all the time. But I think that they have something in common. I think that they all have more of a Eastern heart-based um, character. Yes, you work with structures, and um, you need to understand orchestration very well, which you need to have a structural mind to understand orchestration. Actually, I'm not talking about instrumentation. I'm talking about real orchestration,
Yeah, yeah,
which
of
is
course.
work with a lot with psychology and many other parameters. But I think um, sort of the heart aspect of things is very important, because I was suddenly thinking about the French violinist, the gypsy violinist. It's not gypsy, but he played gypsy music. Stefan Grappelli, it's
Of
like
course.
a jazz violin,
Yeah.
which I like a lot. And all these people, they have this sort of heart presence when they do some things. And I actually sneak in quite a lot of jazz in my
Oh wow.
composition, harmonically.
Yeah, of course.
Um, and sometimes also when I write for the violin, actually, because of Grappelli, it's very strange.
Very
But
nice.
but then you have like like Tchaikovsky and Mahler
Of course, of course.
and well, partly Wagner, not because he has a big heart, but because he's ecstatic in the character. He's not a mathematician. He's more like Virgin Mary. Like I have this ecstatic vision of things, and then I put it onto paper, kind of person. So obviously those and American composers like Johnny Williams, who take that tradition actually further into the cinema with all its constraints and restraints and advantages and disadvantages. But my compatriot Edvard Grieg, I really I have a heart for him as well. I think that there's a reason why Edvard Grieg and Tchaikovsky were so friends, dear friends, and Tchaikovsky and Brahms didn't like each other at all.
Yeah, Tchaikovsky
So
didn't like Wagner as well.
no, but Wagner is a strange kind of different chapter altogether. So that would be another podcast, I think. But this
Yeah,
typical. There was a scene uh, when when um, when Brahms were playing some chamber music of his, and Tchaikovsky was sitting in the hall, and the atmosphere were very tense because they hated each other, or they disliked each other, and obviously you can understand why. And then Edvard Grieg comes into the room. Kaboom! He opens the door, and the atmosphere just becomes full of humor and easiness and love right away, because he just takes tension away from people, and I think that his music does the same thing. And Tchaikovsky and Grieg really loved each other, and it's easy to understand why, actually.
yeah. Is there any music, any piece, or any format that you didn't compose and would like to compose?
Yes. So opera is an interesting genre that I think needs renewal in the good sense. It is an immense, complex, expensive, and hard thing to realize. However, I think that there might be a very, very interesting potential for romantic tonal universal music in the opera sphere. So that's certainly something I would like to work with in the coming, let's say, decades.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Knowing your character of music and the timelessness is definitely one of the words that do truly describe your music. Even uh, ethereal also would be the word, and I would say also even haunting at times, haunting-ish at times. So imagining an opera from Martin Romberg, that's just kind of the idea of that blows my mind. So I truly hope
Thank you.
you will be able to come that to realize that and that will come into fruition. Thank you very much for this most wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I truly hope that people will enjoy and learn from it as well.
The pleasure is all mine, and thank you. I also learn a lot when I speak about my ideas. So thank you for letting me have the chance to reflect together with you in this form of dialogue.
Thank you very much. And to everybody, you can follow Martin on social media. follow his work. Obviously, he's also published music on all the major platforms, so you can check his music there as well, and especially the lovely piano album, Arts and Signs. Check that out, and be on the lookout for the new orchestral pieces that are coming up.
Thank you.